Hello and welcome to the Arise interview, where we take time to reflect on the big stories from the news and on the fortunes and affairs of the world in an hour of conversation with commentators, analysts and thought leaders. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, if there is one man who has ranged with intelligence and ease through the worlds of academia, public service, politics, diplomacy, business, activism and journalism, it would have to be Dr. Patrick Dele Cole, or PDC, a visionary whose faculty for thinking and acquiring knowledge and then turning that into something measurably practical is of a higher, rather more complex order. Over the years, he has repeatedly brought that great intellectual capacity to bear on so many chaotic bits and pieces in Nigeria with almost athletic ability, a man woven into the mesh of this country's civilization, except perhaps in the political violence that's dominated his home state of Rivers. Dr. Patrick Dele Cole, one of the truly pivotal Nigerian minds, coming up. Now, my guest today, Dr. Patrick Dele Cole, is a diplomat, a politician, an activist, a journalist, and a PhD academic who has brought an outstanding reputation to virtually everything he's touched, sending sharp shafts of light to illuminate dark spots, as one admirer put it. He transformed the face of journalism in Nigeria, helping to move the original Daily Times newspaper into the biggest of print leagues, establishing the premier editorial board in the country and lending his weight to the emergence of the Guardian newspaper and to the growth and development of such famous journalists as Stanley Makebu and Dele Giwa. Dr. Cole would go on to become Nigeria's ambassador to Brazil and later still special advisor on international relations to the then president of Nigeria, Olusegun Obasanjo. A remarkable man who's had books written about him, as well as a play and a film made about him by international scholars.
One of the defining contributions of Patrick Dele Cole to Nigerian journalism is the idea of the editorial board as we know it today. Before his time, the practice was that editorials were written by maybe a handful of 2 or 3 people, the editor and maybe the features editor. They will agree on what the issues of the day were, and between them they will write the editorials. But he copied the concept of an editorial board from the US and introduced that at the Daily Times, where they had full-fledged staff who were members of the editorial board who deliberated and wrote editorials. And that also he carried over to the Guardian, because he was one of the founding minds behind the Guardian. So if you look at his contributions at the Times and his contribution to the Guardian, we will say that he has cemented a very important place for himself in the Nigerian media history.
There is that spirit of liberalism that he brought to bear in the case of Daily Times, and in the case of Guardian, that he was also a director of. And I think the one word that we need to use here is that he has been successful in all those endeavors.
Well, let's speak to the man himself, Dr. Patrick Dele Cole, who joins me now in the studio. Absolutely smashingly honored to have you here, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for coming in. And I read somewhere about you that Oxford University in the UK declared that both you and Fela Kuti are folk heroes who should be celebrated. And appropriately, the university students came up with a television pilot called Genius and the Bohemians. Are you aware of that?
No, I'm not.
Well, I'm glad I'm the one who's telling you about it, because I mean it's an absolutely fascinating idea. I never really, I mean, I can think of you certainly as a genius, but a bohemian characterized by the unconventional life. Could that be a fitting description for you?
Well, I think they're talking about my mode of dressing most of the time. I tend to wear a shirt rather than a tie or,
Okay, right.
or a big I just thought that being casual has nothing to do with being casual upstairs.
Yes. But I mean, that does not in any way describe who you are in
No,
the
not
real
at all.
sense.
No.
You're not a bohemian.
No. No. There's nothing. I'm about the most traditional,
Conservative?
No, definitely not.
Liberal
But
minded.
willing to push at boundaries.
Sure.
And getting the whole idea of debate, the whole idea of the novelty of ideas inspire me. And I want to spend time with young people, especially because they seem to have a great deal of fun for new ideas, and to see how those ideas fit into whatever it is that we're doing today. One of the few things which young people tend to forget is that the guys who are now in power actually took power when they were young.
Yes.
And part of the problem is that they've stayed too long because they've not, the seed has not been replanted.
Right.
And it's not grown again. The result, of course, is some kind of atrophy. And if you like, tone deafness in places where brilliance and light should have been showing, so that we can get ourselves out of this morass that we find ourselves in.
That's quite extraordinary. I want to talk about the youth and you and what's going on in Nigeria a bit later in this chat. But you are not just a brilliant journalist with great intellectual capacity, but also a diplomat and a politician. Quite a career you've had there.
I think you missed one. I also used to be a university teacher.
Yeah, of course, you were, I mean, that is true, an academic.
An academic.
No question about that. But also an activist.
Yes.
Which some people forget.
I remember I demonstrated when I was only between 16 and 17 against the French nuclear bomb in Sahara. I was only in Form 4. So from the very beginning, my parents, my mother was a card-carrying member of the action group, and her membership was about one of the most prized things that she had, because you had this incredible system where somebody came every month on a bicycle to collect 2 shillings, which was the membership fee for the action group. And she religiously kept it, and he religiously came. Now that was how that party was funded. The idea that you are in a political party, it should be funded from within.
Absolutely.
From the interest which people show in it, rather than what now takes place, some rich person, provides
or maybe
money,
even a governor
or whatever.
fund.
Yes, and it does reduce your ability to resist, to respond, because you have to be able to hold the political party to which you belong to account. You said you were going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, I haven't seen you do any of that. And my mother used to call this man riding this bicycle, Nisha or whatever, said, but the action group, people will say you are going to do so and so and so. Why haven't you done it?
So she held them to account.
Precisely.
Yes.
So
And that's
it was a
key,
good
isn't it?
school.
And I mean, you always, there's so much that you've done. I mean, one hardly knows where to begin, but you always approach these different careers from an intellectual perspective. Is that what unites them all in your life, the approach that you've taken?
Yes. I think it's the academic and also the philosophical underpinnings that the only reason why you're here is to serve. It is service. Service is the reason why we are what we are. And if you are not serving, then there's something wrong with you, because you have to leave the place a little better than you found it, at least.
And let's take your journalism career, for instance. How did that evolve?
Well, what had happened was that I was in Cambridge, and they...
Which is an achievement in itself.
The government then had a problem. How do we get the soldiers out of government? How do they disengage?
Is that the British government?
No.
The Nigerian government.
This is around about 1973.
Right.
And because there was some crazy talk of something called diarchy, a kind of military, and they had hunted a number of people, and they asked me to come. So I came in order to help prepare this disengagement. So what do you do? What are the critical issues that will be facing the government between when they announced that they were going to leave and when they left? So you had the creation of states, whether or not Lagos should continue to be the federal capital, the civil service reforms, the local government reforms, the all kinds of issues. So we had a think tank within the cabinet office. And now we were putting all these ideas, and by 74 or so, in October, we had a rough blueprint of what needed to be done. How the political parties were to be formed and how they were to be funded, how the local government will be funded, because our idea was that the local government should be funded directly. Since that was the principal level of development,
right,
money should go to them.
I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but I have to take a break, but we'll continue once we come back. Unfortunately, the break is fixed. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with the inimitable Ambassador Patrick Dele Cole. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Anyegolu. Now, my guest today is said to have the right stuff. Dr. Patrick Dele Cole, journalist, academic, activist, former ambassador, and former presidential advisor, to mention a few of the many caps he's worn over the years. But now let's get him to cast his analytical eye over a recent development that shook this country to the core of its foundations, the End SARS protests and its aftermath. The government, the Nigerian government, responded to those demonstrations by setting up panels of inquiry into what happened around the now disbanded police unit known as the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, or SARS. Arise News, of course, covering those protests comprehensively, including how they came to a juddering end following the alleged live fire incident when protesters were reportedly shot at the Lekki toll gate in Lagos, and of course the violence, arson and looting that followed. And the former ambassador and former presidential advisor, Dr. Patrick Dele Cole, is still with me in the studio. I want to just get to this in a minute, but I would like you to finish what you were telling us before we went on a break about how you
that was setting up the
yes.
And so we set the program, which there was a coup in 75. So when the 75 coup took place, General Mohammed took that program and it became the famous 9-point political program, announcing that they were going to leave in 1979. The question now was, all right, now we have a political program, how do we sell it to the people? It was in that light that they thought well, why don't you go to the Daily Times and there try and sell the program to the people? So I went to the Daily Times, and when I got there, first of all, I was very surprised by the very high quality of journalists that I met. So it was easy to mix in intellectually, and then to bring in the various changes, which were, because I was bringing lots of people from the United States, to bring in the editorial board, to bring in Dele Giwa, to Stanley McCabe, and the former governor of Anambra State, Madnuju, and all this. These were people that came in to help in the Daily Times to bring it up.
Absolutely fascinating story. We'll get back to talking a little bit about you in a minute, but let's turn to the introduction I just gave a minute ago, those End SARS protests. And I know that you've got a very close affiliation with young people. You try to kind of inspire them and get them to do things and be more active. I wonder if you've been following those panels of inquiry, particularly the one taking place in Lagos. If so, what is your assessment of what's been going on there?
Well, I think that it was a wake-up call, long overdue. The government has been rather irresponsible in dealing with the things which it says that it should deal with. Definitely, it has had no space for young people. And they have absolute right to feel frightened and unprotected.
And aggrieved.
And aggrieved. And therefore, in organizing this with the influence of news media and the social media, it seemed to have been spontaneous, but obviously it fed into a very deep grievance. And the government was totally inept in dealing with it, all these denials that are no denials. And I think it would have paid them better to have apologized for what they did wrong and to set about trying to fix what they did wrong, even while you are having the inquiry. There are things which could be done.
Absolutely.
The inquiry is not a panacea for the problems which NSAS had raised. It had raised the question of, government inefficiency, government corruption.
There's so much more, than just
and
that.
And you could do a lot more things than just, the inquiry was necessary, and it could continue for a very long time.
But is it your sense that in terms of what's emerging from those panels, that people are being called to account or are likely to be called to account?
Well, I don't think that people are being called to account, and I don't think that, I think the experience which we've had in Nigeria is that these kinds of inquiries, once they settle, it takes a long time, and the assumption is that people tend to forget
what caused the end. Nevertheless, it could be said, though, that at the very least, people are getting a better sense of how brutal SARS really was and a better idea of police corruption and brutality in Nigeria.
Yes, I don't think Nigerians were naive as to that. I think they knew all along that it was as bad as that.
Maybe, it's a bit stark, though, isn't it?
Yeah, okay. But I do not see the political will to change. Because if you had the political will to change, the first thing to do is mea culpa. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that this thing happened. Please. Then you go around trying to fix the things which are clearly there. You do not go into a denial. Oh, it didn't happen. The people didn't die. You know, it was CNN or somebody who was busy trying to lit a fire. The thing was already blazing. That, no, the fact that you had riots that followed, that in itself is no reason for you to be less concerned. It's no reason for you to salvage your conscience and say this was a violence follows protest. It's almost a cliche. But the violence is not what defines the protest.
That's a good point. And I imagine that for the police in particular, who are in some ways the people in the dock, it must all be quite uncomfortable with many of their sort of personnel under the microscope. I noticed that they've tried and failed to secure adjournments and have often failed to produce their staff who are being accused of crimes. I mean, do you think they're trying to frustrate the work of the panel?
The boy may well. I think that lots of Nigerians do not really understand how archaic the bureaucracy of the police really is. For example, a policeman who is serving in Minna and is transferred to Port Harcourt, you would imagine that at the end of the month his pay will be in Port Harcourt. But I want to assure you that he probably has to return to Minna for 6 months before that to collect his pay every month.
That is ridiculous.
Precisely. That is how broken that particular system is. And to be fair, they are heavily underpaid, heavily undertrained, and totally inadequate for the jobs to which they are being called upon to do. Each time you want to do a reform, you pick up the policemen, and then asking the policemen to run around with governors and senators and this type of thing, it's not their job. You should, if you want, you should create a security unit, like they have in the United States, whose job is to look after all these people and let the police do the things which policemen are supposed to do. They're supposed to be your friend, they're supposed to protect you, and then they're supposed to investigate crimes and bring criminals to justice. Now, these are fairly simple, straight enough, but to do that, you must give them the instruments with which to do it.
That's a very interesting point. Please stay with us. We're going to take another one of those breaks. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with the iconic Dr. Patrick Dele Cole. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Now, my guest today, Ambassador Dr. Patrick Dele Cole, has been at the forefront of transformative activist politics in Nigeria for decades, helping to return the country to democratic rule and subsequently rising to the position of presidential advisor. But like a terrifying nightmare, into this picture of pseudo-civilized politics comes the scenario that's repeatedly played out in his home state of Rivers in the Niger Delta, where political violence has dominated every election in the state, with dozens of soldiers killed, police officers beheaded, civilians slaughtered, and buildings destroyed, not to mention militancy, all in the name of politics, as rival supporters of the PDP and APC battle for supremacy. Both the Nigerian Electoral Commission, INEC, and the European Union have confirmed Rivers State as the unmistakable leader in electoral violence, the highest among the 36 states of Nigeria. And as the 2023 elections approach, the only question is, will it be more frightening this time than it was in 2015 and 2019? And Ambassador Dr. Patrick Dele Cole is still with me in the studio. Thank you for staying with us. What is it, do you think, that makes politics and the electoral process in Rivers State so unremittingly violent? Because to the rest of us, it looks like a political jungle, as one newspaper put it, where thugs are bred and armed by politicians who then deploy them to attack and kill political opponents.
I think it's the promise of wealth and the lack of the ability to spread it. I think also that the idea that this is an oil-rich area, but the workers, the people who are working in the industry are no longer there. They've either violence has driven them or high prices have driven them out of the area. The result is that you have a large number of young people who have no recourse to progress. There's no jobs there. There are no businesses in the river state. The oil, as I said, all the oil companies, Shell, Ajib, they've all left, and you have this vacuum. And the government is the only person that, institution that has money. And to seize that institution, it's worth spending all, monies that you've never dreamt of. And in order to get to the governors or the important people, they resort to cultism. So that almost all of them are members of cults which fight against each other in order to promote whatever idea that they want to. And finally, there is also the question of militancy. Some oil is stolen every now and again. I started a program
I was actually
called Stop the Theft.
That's part of your activism.
Yeah, and but it didn't work because the oil companies and the people who are in that business didn't actually want it to work. But there's no doubt that River State and all those oil producing states will continue in violence unless those oil companies that used to operate there return there and begin to give some sense of hope to these thousands and thousands of young people who are coming out, who feel that the only thing they can do is either to follow this cult or follow this militant.
And yet, into that devil's inferno, if you don't mind my saying so, went your son, Dr Dele Cole, who made a very visible foray into politics when he ran for the position of governor of River State. Was his political awakening his own, or did you inspire it?
Well, I think it was mostly his own, and I think also he was coming from that group of people that we have been trying to inspire, the young people with the ideas, the young people who are not in either of those camps that I would just describe, who feel that a lot more could be done for the state. And in any case, his own background is in oil, so he understands how it is important that these businesses should return. And I used to have a joking tease that in order for you to rule Nigeria properly, you should go to the oil producing states in that area and spend 20 days. And because it's like nowhere else in the world. There have been no progress in the oil producing areas in Nigeria in the past 30 to 40 years. You may have little progress in Port Harcourt, but more or less maybe a little in Warri, but that's it.
Patchy.
And worse than that, the pollution is even 10 times more, and nobody is checking that. There are no checks on the police. The gas flaring is even worse. So you know when you put all these things together, life is what Hobbes describes it in the rivers: short, nasty, and brutish.
Yeah. And does it look like your son, I mean, is going to attempt to venture into that devil's inferno once again?
Oh, I'm sure he
politics?
will. At the moment, he's in Oxford. There's a fellow there too, but he believes he needs to learn a little bit more about how societies are put together, how leadership works, and how to turn a society around, how to empower the people that you say you're ruling, to give them enough confidence to challenge you, to say, these are the things which you said you were going to do, which you have not done. In any case, apart from the ones which you said you were going to do, how about 1, 2, 3, 4, which you forgot to mention? Why don't you take that on board? And it's that conversation that is now necessary. And I believe that we have had a singular bad luck in the quality of leadership that we've had in that area.
Well, I promise you it's not limited to that area. I mean, just listening to your sterling analysis there, I just wonder how you yourself operated as a politician. I mean, can you be this different and still belong to the political class in Nigeria and a mainstream political party at that? In other words, is there an antithesis between political diversity and identity where you have to be all of one thing versus collective party identity, which is everything? Because it sounds like you're the opposite of all the terrible things that you're telling us happened there.
Yes, because I was coming from an idea, from a place which suggests that change is possible. I may have been naive, may have been a bit simple-minded, and obviously I didn't succeed very well, very much.
Well, you became a presidential advisor.
Well, whatever, but that's as a personal.
Right.
It wasn't, and I will tell you a story about the closeness of that. But definitely going at home, it was necessary that when we say you give money directly to the local governments, and then the governors then take the money because it is paid into the state account and don't give it to the local government, there you have a disruption. And it is worse in places like in the River State or the oil-producing states.
Right. Well, we've still got a bit of time before we have to take a break. We've got about 4 minutes before we take a break. A few years ago, you spearheaded a campaign to rehabilitate Fela Kuti by suggesting that Fela deserves to have a city, an airport, or the National Theatre named after him. How has that gone?
Well, it went very well, and unfortunately, the ministers that have been in charge of culture in Nigeria have one thing in common. None of them knows anything about culture. The result is when the president is appointing people and there's a, last job, he doesn't know what to do, so go and do culture or do information and culture. The result is that these people of really mediocre ability. So if you want to do something like Fela and portray him, it has to come from inside. It has to be something which definitely all the Yorubas and the Egba people want it, but it has to be led by somebody who is in the federal government, because in the long run, the kudos which fella gets, it's for Nigeria.
Absolutely.
So you have to be able to see that connection. I'm afraid most of the ministers of information have never seen the connection.
It's very interesting because a lot of the plaudits that he's got has come from abroad.
Yeah.
And that sort of rubs off on the rest of the
Precisely.
country, like wakes everybody up and says, oh my God,
Oh,
you mean
yeah.
Fela Kuti is actually revered this
The
much.
president of France comes to Nigeria, the one thing he wants to do is to go to the shrine. Now that shows you the kind of influence which he has. That we have these icons, it's with us here. It's our business to develop it. Now, but if you put people who are going to spirit away the money that is voted to do it, to do something else, then obviously you get what you get what you get.
Yeah, but I mean, was that something that you felt would have been supported? You know, for example, naming, because I suppose he was at loggerheads for a long time with a lot of governments here, and he still had a fairly bad reputation with governments, but, you know, lots of marijuana and things like that, and, you know, which to some extent was seen as going against the laws of the country.
Well, how things change.
Well, they have changed,
It's
certainly.
the same government now that is legalizing marijuana. So,
Well, certainly
you have
not the Nigerian government.
Oh, yeah. They are beginning to say that they will legalize it. The point which I'm making is that you know, Fela's contribution to culture is not based on marijuana.
I agree.
The culture was a lot bigger
Yes.
than the marijuana. You may abuse him for that, but embrace him for the culture.
That's a very good point. And on that note, let me take another break.
Okay.
You're watching The Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with the irrepressible Dr. Patrick Dele Cole. Stay with us. Welcome back to The Arise interview. I'm Charles Anyegolo. My guest today is Ambassador Dr. Patrick Dele Cole, who succeeded in placing the day-to-day struggles in Nigeria in the context of a grand battle of ideas, managing to combine intellectual rigor with an incorrigibly high romanticism, if you like. PDC, as he's fondly known, turned 80 in August, and at various stages of his life he's been a journalist, historian, diplomat, administrator, politician and academic. But it is the power of his journalism and the wonderfully demanding scratch of his pen that we most remember and celebrate. From his years as director of New Nation Press to a stint as director of Guardian newspapers and onto his managing directorship of the Daily Times newspaper, Dele Patrick Cole has led Nigerian journalism from the front. Sharp as a needle and without a doubt a nationwide bestseller, and an intricate and elegant writer whose best books and numerous articles scratch away the veneer of Nigerian life, exposing the contradictions and tensions beneath.
For the flamboyant Dele Cole, what struck me most was that he was a graft from the civil service into state capitalism. At the time these intrusions began to happen, the reigning creed at that time was that government should control the commanding heights of the economy. So he came in, one of the big advantages was that he brought a new level of intellectual rigor into popular journalism. He brought PhD holders and so on, even though in the end, this also created a huge fissure.
Yes, of course.
Between these so-called people from the ivory tower and those who felt they were the guardians of the magic circle of journalism.
Of course, we're talking about the absolutely brilliant Dele Patrick Cole there, who I'm honored to say is my guest today. Now, at one point you wanted to tell us, because you were also a former presidential advisor to President Obasanjo, you were saying there's a story there.
Yes, the story started in 75. The coup in 75 left that political program I talked about in Dodonbarak.
That's the coup in which Murtala Mohammed was assassinated.
Yes.
Right.
They removed Gowan. They removed Gowan.
Okay, yeah, the first coup
first
before,
one.
yeah, 6
Before
months
he
later.
was-
Yeah, okay, yeah. The removal
So
of Gowan,
that
yes.
document was there, and then he had written a 9-point political program. And then from there, I now had to go to the Daily Times to try and sell it. The first thing we did was actually to hold a world conference on federalism, to bring everybody from the world to come and talk about federalism, all the leaders in WC, where all, they came, they talked about what it is to be a federal state. And then that connection started my connection with General Obasanjo and General Yaradua. So that was the beginning. And in 79, when they left, I left. And went, as it were, like the cowboy riding into the sun.
I like that. What kind of horse were you riding? No, I'm just kidding.
Well, it was a Mustang.
Right. I like that. I like Mustangs. I'm a bit of a horse. I like horses.
Okay, there you go. And then, so that was 79. And the Shagari took over. And then we had 83. Now, 83 is the Buhari
Yes.
coup.
The first incarnation.
Yes, the first one. That coup, I never understood why there should have been a coup in 1983. There was no reason. But anyway, it happened. And it wasn't very successful. It wasn't very good. And then it was changed. I know the President, General Buhari, extremely well. But truth be told, it was not a good coup. So in 85, when he was removed, by that time the link between myself and Obasanjo had been that strong that we had started the PDM, which turned into the PDP, so Yaradua and Obasanjo and a few of us had started that. And it became clear that if ever there was going to be an election, we have to think of these two. And Obasanjo, as you know, became the president in 1999 up till 2007. But I left in 2001, and I haven't been back since. I decided that, well, I haven't done it, I should do something else, and that was it.
And how would you rate the Obasanjo government in comparison to the other administrations after him?
I think that he was a lot better president because he was not afraid of opposition. In fact, he welcomed it. He liked you to fight and argue against him, and he didn't like too much sycophancy. But not many of his generals knew that. The result was that they continued to be sycophantic to him, and he continued to despise them.
Interesting. Very interesting. And of course, in addition to being a journalist, you as I said, you're a diplomat, a politician. You're from the oil-rich Niger Delta region. I wonder how that shaped your politics and your appreciation of how the parts fit into the whole in Nigeria.
Yep. If you come from the oil-producing countries, part of Nigeria, you come with a wounded spirit because you feel that the rest of the country is unfair to you. There is oil, yes, but come on, develop it like Dubai, and then take some of it, take most of it, but develop it. Do not leave it to be the backwater of Nigeria, which it is today. There is no development in the oil-producing areas.
But the governors are equally guilty.
Yes. They always, this is the argument. But it's a secular argument. They say, okay, they give you 13%. So if they give you 13%, what have you done with it? And of course, your retort is, why are you giving me 13%? You took 87%. What have you done with the 87%?
Yeah, that's a good point. We've got about 2 minutes before we have to end the interview. Fascinating talking with you. But looking back at the years, is there something that you really wanted to do that you haven't done but still really badly want to do?
Yes. I think that we have to form a political party which is clear in its mind as to what it wants the country to be, and goes for an election based on the manifesto, based on the...
In other words, an ideological party.
Well, not only ideological, just, a people's party.
Right.
Full of people, and these are the things they want. Okay, you want education, you want agriculture, you want that. And that should be what is like a report card, which the government has to tick as it's going through. Not what's going on now, where it is absolutely impossible to tell the difference between the PDP and the APC. As you can see, where it's, one party can, governor of one party can move to another party. And the thing that is most galling about this is that our Constitution is quite clear. The Constitution states that you cannot leave your party and join another party without resigning your post. And, It's been trammeled and changed and battered.
But that's what you would like to see.
That's what I'd like to see.
Dr. Patrick Dele Cole, who's also a former ambassador and former presidential advisor, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, sir.
That's it for this edition of The Arise Interview. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, bye-bye, and thank you for watching.